spring symposium, How the U.S. Wins the Global Tech Competition. As you can tell, for our first symposium, we chose a really easy topic that I am sure we're going to find the exact right answer to in the next 2 hours. Is that right, Alan?
Oh, sure.
Alan says it's going to happen, so it's going to happen. For those of you who haven't been to a CSET event before, I want to tell you a little about us. CSET recently celebrated our 6th anniversary. We are a think tank that provides data-driven analysis at the intersection of security and emerging tech policy. Lots of folks say they're data-driven or evidence-based, but CSET is unique in the amount of resources that we have put into creating our data infrastructure. We have over 65 analysis-ready data sets, and we maintain public data tools like the Map of Science, which organizes the world's science and tech research literature, making it easy to identify key trends and gaps in research. We also create public data tools like the Agora, a living collection of AI laws, regulations, and other governance documents from the US and around the world. Something else that sets CSET apart is our successful focus on skating not to where the puck is, but where it's going. Before supply chain disruptions became front page news in 2021, CSET had published 2 reports that mapped global semiconductor supply chains and identified opportunities to strengthen U.S. access to cutting-edge chips. As policymakers look to take action on supply chain disruptions, CSET established relationships with key stakeholders in the executive branch and Congress. These relationships, fueled by CSET's research and expertise, helped lay the groundwork for the CHIPS and Science Act. Our 2-part series, AI and the Future of Disinformation campaigns, gave an early warning on the potential use of generative AI and disinformation propaganda. Last year's report, Building the Tech Coalition, provided a roadmap on how AI can be used effectively to strengthen our defense capabilities and ensure our national security through its analysis of the 18th Airborne Corps' operationalization of the Maven Smart System. These are just a few examples, and staying ahead of the curve is why we're here today. We're going to talk to tech leaders and experts, including CSET's own, about what an AI-enabled future where the U.S. is the dominant leader looks like. We'll discuss what progress the U.S. has already made towards that future, and importantly, what we need to do next. I want to take a couple of minutes to recognize some folks that are helping CSET continue our forward-thinking tradition and expand our deep engagement with emerging tech partners. This is our first public recognition of our new CSET Advisory Board, and I am just delighted to introduce our founding members. First, Mr. Michael Howard. Mike, if you want to stand so folks can see you. Mr. Howard is the founder and managing member of the MJH Group, a private investment and management consulting firm. He is also the Chief Operating Officer of the Maryland State Retirement and Pension System, for which he previously served as a trustee. Mr. Howard has worked with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission and the Division of Corporation Finance, served as an advisor to the White House Business Council, and is a distinguished member of the Economic Club of New York. The next 2 members couldn't be with us in person today, but we are so glad to have them on our advisory board. Mr. Joel Meyer is currently the president of public sector at Domino Data Lab. He previously served in several roles within the Department of Homeland Security, most recently as a Deputy Assistant Secretary for Strategic Initiatives and on the White House National Security Council staff. Mr. Meyer is also a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Our 3rd founding member is the Honorable Sarah Sewell. Dr. Sewell is Executive Vice President for National Innovation Strategy at IQT. She has served as an Undersecretary of State, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, and National Security Advisor to the Senate Majority Leader. Dr. Sewell also taught on the faculty of the Harvard Kennedy School for a decade and was Minerva Chair at the Naval War College. She serves on the Board of Trustees for the Center for Naval Analyses. Dr. Sewell couldn't be with us, but again, we're glad to have her and Mr. Meyer on our board. The 4th advisory board member that we'd like to recognize today is also our keynote speaker, the Honorable Alan Estevez. I'm going to let CSET's Executive Director, Dr. Dewey Murdick, introduce him.
Welcome. Thank you so much, Krista. I really appreciate it. It is great to have you all here today. This is going to be a really exciting conversation. Before I introduce Alan, I just wanted to briefly just share a little bit about CSET. We're really motivated here at CSET, like fundamentally, to inform the public debate on the security implications of AI and emerging technologies. Providing actionable insight is central to our mission. Ultimately, however we govern AI won't be just defined by the rules and regulations that are written down. It's going to be informed by the thousands of decisions that are made daily by people like you. And making sure that we stay engaged is really important as you're developing AI systems, as you're testing its application, or as you're establishing best practices, or you're adopting it. So we want our analysis to be relevant, and we want it to help shape this future. And to do this, we need a two-way conversation, and that's one of the exciting things about today. We can share what we're learning. You're going to see it in our products. You're going to hear from us today. You can engage in a lot of different ways, but we need insight on where to focus attention. So just like Krista was saying, we can skate where the puck is going as opposed to where it is right now. So help us focus. What are the most critical questions that we should be looking at? And engage with us in the question answer period today, on the side of the conversation today, in the reception later this evening, or you're going to hear a little bit more about the CSET forum later on. So there's a lot of ways to engage to help make sure that we're really providing the most proactive insight. Now, turning back to the program. I'm very happy to introduce our keynote speaker, the Honorable Alan Estevez. Mr. Estevez brings decades of dedicated public service experience and some private sector experience too. Most recently, Mr. Estevez served as the Undersecretary of Commerce for Industry and Security. In this role, he led BIS, or the Bureau of Industry and Security, where he advanced U.S. national security, foreign policy, and economic opportunities. These are all really central issues for today's conversation, so you bring a lot of experience to that. Before being appointed as Undersecretary of Commerce, Mr. Estevez had a 36-year career at the Department of Defense. His most recent defense position was as Principal Deputy Undersecretary for Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. This gave him deep insight into the practical challenges and opportunities of integrating advanced technologies within very complex organizations, which is really relevant to today. He also spent time in the private sector in Deloitte, and is continuing to broaden and bring his experience into a variety of different places. Mr. Estevez asked me not to do this, but I can't help myself. He's also gotten some really cool awards. I won't go into all of them, but his 3 DoD Distinguished Public Service Medals, the Distinguished Civilian Service Medal, 2 Presidential Rank Awards, and Service to America Medal for National Security are very significant. And I'm really glad that you can have been recognized so much for that. But please join me in welcoming the Honorable Alan Estevez. Thank you.
Thank you, Dewey, and thank you to CSET. First, let me just say, it's interesting to be back up here unemployed, which means I'm well rested in reality. But what it also means is you wake up and you say, holy, I have to do a speech today, and no one's reading it for me, or at least the talking points. Even though I never use those talking points that my staff wrote for me, it was at least something for me to look at and say, oh yeah, here's what I really want to talk about. So I had to do all that myself today. So you're here with the first raw version of Alan Estevez. Second, I really do want to thank CSET. It's interesting, CSET is very much like BIS. It's the Center of National Security and Emerging Technologies. And in fact, at BIS, I hired a whole bunch of C-setters who I called B-setters when they were in my space. And I'll recognize a couple of them. The fabulous, my right arm for a period of time, Loren Lasky, who's now over at the Senate, Emily Weinstein, Will Hunt, working for the Secretary SafeCon, and of course my counterpart over at the NSC, Turin Trapo, all C-setters at one point or another. So critical, obviously, to what we were doing. And I would also note that I read CSET reports, and they gave me ideas about how I wanted to proceed in the job I was doing at BIS. Especially those wonderful reports about, what are good choke points, and I'll talk more about choke points. But if you happen to be a great American company like Tristan Holtom's company, and Tristan will be up here in a moment, who happens to make a choke point tool or a choke point technology, you live in two good worlds. One, you are making a great tool that is a choke point. Two, I'm going to spend a lot of time with you if you're at BIS. Right, Tristan? So what I'm going to do this afternoon is just give you some reflections on my time at BIS and some ideas about how I view export controls and how they should be executed. What I am not going to do today is conjecture on what this administration is going to do. I will note that, from what I can tell so far, they're more or less following the course. The recent prohibition on sales of the NVIDIA's H20 chip to the PRC is something that we were actually considering. So it's not surprising if they're going to follow that course that they did. But we'll see. There's lots of things are in turmoil as this administration rolls out its policies around this. So looking back, here's what I have to say. One, export controls are a great tool for protecting national security, but they are only one of the tools in the toolbox that can be executed. And you have to recognize that the use of export controls as those tools is a transitory thing. Whoever you are controlling the capability to, in our case, mostly the PRC, as our major focus, they're going to, especially a nation like the PRC that has significant resources and significant talent pools, are going to work to get around the controls that you put in place. So when you're doing it, you have to make an assessment of, is this going to last for 3 months? And then if that's the case, is it worth it? Is it going to last 2 years? How significant is the technology gap? So all those things need to be considered while you're doing this. It is only a transitory tool, or as my boss said on the way out, a speed bump on the way. There are other things you need to be doing in order to ensure our technological superiority in the United States. Second, the expansive use of export controls, the way we were doing it. And again, many of you have heard me say this, the way we were using export controls is not, your parents' Buick, as it were, or your parents' Oldsmobile. The export control regimes that were built in the 90s around non-proliferation and weapons of mass destruction are not the tools that are needed today to manage today's threats and to deal with today's technology, especially the speed at which technology advances. So if you're like me and you believe that artificial intelligence is going to be one of the keys to future warfare, and you want to ensure that the United States is at the lead in that when it comes to application of those tools to military capability. When I talk about artificial intelligence for military, I'm talking about, command and control, advanced targeting, autonomous weapons, logistics, my favorite topic, where artificial intelligence is built for logistics just because it's such a data-intensive, data-rich capability. And the speed of logistics can win wars. The failure of logistics can also lose wars, as I'm sure the Russians learned in their first assault on Ukraine in February, March of 22. So all those things are going to be critical. And our work in slowing down PRC's advancement of artificial intelligence capabilities, I believe, are critical. Now, one of the things that we can't slow down, and the DeepSeek model shows that. And let me start off by saying DeepSeek was not a surprise to many of us who were, looking at the data around that. And of course, I've lost access to my classified networks. But DeepSeek had good talent, and I'm not sure that I believe everything they said, but if they were using H800s, which were illegal in China for a year, used a lot of inference off American models, you can make a pretty good model. But that's not where the risk is. The risk for us, and this is way beyond a BIS thing, the risk for the United States is the Chinese will adapt. They'll take AI and they'll put it into the capabilities. We are just so slow in doing that. And part of it's because of the deliberate nature of the way we go things and the risks that we're willing to take. But part of it is just, the bureaucracy that bounds around our capabilities. So we do need to take those risks and adapt AI fast. It's not just having ChatGPT out there. You need to figure out how it's going to adapt, both from the industrial perspective and from a military perspective. Little side note. But that's why we did the export controls the way we did, because of our concerns about the advancement of technologies and the way we viewed the risks of having our adversaries beat us to the punch using those technologies. So I also believe that the use of export controls required a more dynamic, agile approach than, again, the traditional approach from the 90s. If you propose a rule for Wassenaar, you're in a 2 to 3 year cycle. You can't afford to do that in today's technological world. As I used to say, if I'm going to defend quantum tools or quantum capability through export controls, I need to move at the speed of quantum, not at the speed of 2 to 3 year bureaucracy of consensus building amongst nations. And frankly, we didn't get where we wanted to be around that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. The other important thing is that you do need to take an assessment of what's the collateral impact on industry. So I can't completely, if I'm going to do export controls, what I don't want to do is destroy the industries that I'm controlling that are giving us that technological advancement. And that's one of the reasons our rules, and at least in my era, were so complicated. We moved from 30, 40-page rules to 300, 400-page rules. A boon to many of the law firms in this town. But that was not the goal. But what we were trying to achieve is what's the right balance between control and the nuance of protecting adversarial advancement while allowing commercial sales that did not impact national security. And that led to a lot of very complex rules. We tried to get that balance right. Obviously, we did not always, but that was truly our attempt. And I'd suggest that that's what anyone who's working with export controls should be doing. Now, a lot of people always ask me, are you doing this for economic advantage? And what we would always say, and I believe this, is that it's not for economic advantage. It's truly for national security. And in fact, if we were trying to bring along our allies, and I spent a lot of time working with our allies on our controls, that was one of the first questions they always asked us. And it's funny, their companies would say, you're putting us at a disadvantage, just like our companies would say to me. And germ of truth in both, but germ of not truth in both. But what we did not want it implied is that we were doing this for economic advantage, and we wanted to stress that these were tools for national security and not to stop the Chinese from being able to sell whatever capability. So that's kind of like my going in, overarching thoughts. I will say, if I look back, I'm not going to grade our work because I think this would be a terrible thing for me to stand up here and grade myself. Someone else can do that for me. But if I was to say how we've done, I'd say we were pretty good on semis. I think the 3 October rules, one was in November, one was in December, but we'll call them the October rules, and 22, 23, and 24, the Foundry Compliance Rule and the AI Diffusion Rule, were all pretty good rules that were working to achieve the outcome that we were trying to get. And let me step on that for a moment. A lot of my team really like to do export controls. That's what they grew up doing. And they liked the beauty of doing a good export control. And I used to tell them, it's not about the beauty of the control. It's about the outcome that we were trying to achieve. So if the control looks a little bit crazy, that's okay if we're going to achieve the outcome. Now, measuring that outcome is a problem, but we'll get to that. But anyway, I thought we did pretty good on those rules. I would have liked to have gotten some of them out a little faster than we did. Some of them just took the time to either get the parameter right and learn what the parameter was. I spent the summer of 23 talking to anyone who ever built an AI model and talking to the companies that developed the chips that went into AI models to figure out how to get that parameter right, especially since we didn't get it quite right in October 22. And I thought that was important to do. And if it took us longer to get that right parameter, I think that was the right thing to do. And in 24, we were negotiating with our allies. And again, we were trying to make sure that our companies and their companies were on parity while we were still protecting the national security. In reality, from the time that I took over the negotiations, and I did a round-the-world trip in June of 24. We closed that deal probably in the first week in September. And there was some tough negotiations going on there. I think I read one article that said between Gino Raimondo and I, we were bad cop and worse cop. And I'm not sure which was which. But I've been in negotiations with Secretary Raimondo, and she could be a pretty tough cop. But I think that was right to do that. I think our work with our allies was really important and came out okay. And again, that drove the very high complexity of those rules. We did a very good job of standing up our information and communications technology and services, better said as ICTS capability. That was a brand new capability given to us. It took us about a year. First of all, I got the capability to do this, but I had no funding and I had 3 people on borrowed manpower to do it. Within a year, I had hired an outstanding director who's still there, former federal prosecutor. And, within a couple of months of her coming on board, we had banned Kaspersky software. Again, not just for the government, but for the American people, because that's where the risk really lies. By the end of the year, we had put on a prohibition of Chinese connected vehicles and key components. And for those of you who haven't heard the spiel on why we would want to do that, again, is that an economic thing to stop BYD? The answer is your car knows an awful lot about you. Your car knows your phone book. Your car actually knows your phone calls. Your car does get a software update. That software update can broadcast things out of the car as well as send software into the car. And since your car is taking a lot of pictures, it can include those phone calls in the picture in your phone book and actually where you go all the time. My car, I start my car. Even now, if I start my car at 7 a.m, my car on the map says Commerce Building. And of course, that software update can turn your car into a brick. It can say, push button, car doesn't start on May 1st, for example. So we viewed that as a national security risk to the infrastructure of the United States, and we put in this prohibition on PRC connected vehicles. And again, that's not just electric vehicles. So I thought standing up ICTS was a pretty good job. Speaking of Russia, I thought our work around Russia, we could have done better in the enforcement side, though that was tough. But building the coalition and building the controls was the right thing to do. How that all plays out, I don't know. And on the enforcement side, the tough problem was third-party nations, especially the PRC, that were facilitating the Russia industrial base. So, 90% of the chips that we did not ban sales to for the PRC, and we're talking about, analog chips and connectors and things like that, that were in Russian missiles. all passed through the PRC on their way to Russia, and very hard to stop. And, we worked with the companies and gave them a lot of data around that. But again, it wasn't who they were selling to. It was third, fourth hop down the marketplace. So tough work in that space. I think we did a good job on some quantum controls through Wassenaar. There's a lot more work to be done there. We got some biotech controls out the last week, amongst our 4 rules that we pushed out in the last week of the administration. Again, some more work there, especially with the allies. We didn't control a particular device because the major component is actually a British component, and we hadn't done the homework with the British to do that, and we didn't want to just drop a foreign direct product without having worked with an ally. But again, some good work there. And that's, again, biotech is always tough because some of those same tools that you use for biotech can be used to make pathogen for targeted attack or to cure cancer. And you want the latter, you don't want the former. So all good there. What we did not do is move the needle on trying to make a more agile multinational regime. And I had some ideas there, just getting our own government in line to move out on that. Probably needed another 4 years of work around that to make that happen. But it's something that should happen, frankly. So let me just close out. I got some premises on some things that should be done on any time you're doing export controls. And again, it's not about the beauty of the control, it's about the outcome. First, before you do a control, I think you have to ask yourself, what am I trying to achieve? So from our semi-controls, for example, it's how do I impede PRC development of artificial intelligence applications that can enhance their military capability? And so that's why we would target those controls on certain chips with certain parameters, with trying not to do that same control that would impede a gaming chip that might have a similar parameter. Same thing with the tools that companies like Applied make. So if we're going to put the control out there, what are we trying to achieve with that control? Second, will the control that we're going to do actually achieve that goal? And that becomes very hard to measure. I have anecdotes that say we were doing well, even the CEO of DeepSeek said I could have done a lot better had I had access to more compute. So that's a telling thing. When President Biden met with President Xi in November of 23, 25% of the conversation was about export controls. That shows whatever it is. I don't know if we were achieving the outcome I wanted, but we were certainly annoying them. I'll take that as a plus. And so, will it achieve what you're trying to achieve? And then, a codicil of that is, can you measure that? And there's folks in this room that did help us do that measurement. Third, are allies on board with what you're trying to achieve? Unless the United States is the only country that makes a particular choke point product, you need to bring the allies along. And foreign direct product rule is a great tool in the toolbox, but can't be used all the time. And we were probably stretching the limits of its use in many cases. I'm happy to have done that, but working with allies is a better way to do that. And frankly, sharing information with them was a critical thing to bring them along, and explaining to them the rationale of what you were trying to achieve was critical to bring them along, because they would generally get that. And then their concerns was many times about retaliation from the PRC versus, is this going to impact our business? But you also have to recognize that some of the companies that you're impacting for them are impact on those companies drive their GDP. And so they have those kind of concerns. Fourth, what is the collateral damage to U.S. tech? That has to be considered in doing a control. And again, we try to do that balance. I know not everyone was happy with the way we came out on that, but I thought we were fair in doing that. And again, I tried to be transparent in doing that. I talked to the companies all the time to let them know where we were headed. Fifth, is what you're doing enforceable? Putting out of control that I can't enforce is problematic at best. And the reality is, and I won't go into the resources of BIS, we were way under-resourced, and especially in the enforcement. And enforcement was working with capabilities that were built in the 90s, when there's so many better tools available to help our enforcement regime, some of which I tried to put into place before I left. Enforcement was built around, we make this big machine in the United States and it's being routed through a third party to Iran. Not, it's a chip, which, chips can be pretty big too. People think of them as little things like this, but NVIDIA major assembly is actually a pretty big thing. You could eat lunch on it. Something that's built overseas and shipped from overseas to where it's going is much harder to enforce than something that was built in the United States going through U.S. systems. And then finally, I'd say I learned countrywide controls on choke point technologies, when it's applicable, is a much easier regime to implement and much more effective than playing whack-a-mole with the entity list, especially in a country like the PRC, where I really can't tell, what's military and what's civilian application. I think anything I ship to the PRC can end up being used on a military application. So pretending that I have an entity list control on this company, but not this company, doesn't really get there. So for those really critical choke points, I believe countrywide was actually easier to implement, easier to enforce, and cleaner. So that's what drove what we were thinking about. I think that's a good way to think about export controls for the future. I think they're a critical tool in the toolbox. I think they're should be used the way we were using them. And I think they lead to the protection of our national security. And that's what this is all about. Thank you.
Well, thanks, everybody. Thank you so much, Undersecretary Estevez. I think beyond those being really interesting remarks and a great setup for this panel, it's also very cool to get the raw and well-rested version of Undersecretary Estevez. So thank you so much for those comments. I think we set up, as you put it, sort of the transitory export controls in order to create a gap so that we can have competition, so that we can compete and maintain our technical lead. And while that is an incredibly important part of this competition, this panel now, we want to look at other elements of maintaining a competitive edge, at least maintaining a lead, if not growing that lead. And what are the other elements that come into attempting to compete with what is a very capable competitor? We've seen China, we've seen that their research ecosystem is quite successful. You've seen it in DeepSeek, you've seen it in Huawei, you've seen it with BYD electric vehicles. You've seen it, I mostly, by the way, I'm Emmy Probasco, I do military applications here at CSET, should have remembered that. But you certainly see it with DJI and their drones. And you even see it, we'll have Steph Vitalis later talking about health and genomics, but things like BGI. So there is a pattern here of a very competitive ecosystem that is absolutely supported by the Chinese government. And so now we have to consider, how do we maintain or otherwise build that lead? And much of that happens in the private sector. So that's why I'm so pleased to have a very cool and somewhat diverse panel of folks from the private sector. And I'll just sort of introduce them all too briefly because they're very impressive, but it could take the rest of the panel. I'll start with Jags Kandasamy. Jags is the co-founder and CEO of Latent AI. He is, I hope it's okay to call you a serial entrepreneur, has started several companies and very different domains, but if you recognize the name Latent AI, they are a defense AI company that was recently awarded a quite cool award from DoD that has to do with the operationalization of AI and machine learning that started off in the Navy with something called Project Ammo. If you haven't heard of Project Ammo, it's a really impressive case of the DoD integrating a much faster adoption cycle for AI and ML. So congratulations on that. Thank you for being here. We've also got Addie Cook from Google. Addie is the Global AI Public Policy Lead for Enterprise AI, especially at Google Cloud. Addie's remit covers so much. She has to integrate the legal team, the responsible AI team, across the Google team and the humanitarian efforts team. So she's got a wealth of experience there, but she also has both federal and state level legislative experience. And then we've got Ron Keesing. Ron is the Chief AI Officer at Leidos. He is, actually, I should say, he's doing research development, and my favorite part of your title is deployment. Research development and deployment at Leidos. He is leading the innovation efforts in Leidos, actually building AI ML. Your research focus currently is focused on assurance and trust, which is especially relevant to adoption. And I also found it very interesting that you've been at Leidos for 25 years, which is impressive until you hear that Tristan from Applied Materials has been at Applied Materials for 26 years. Tristan is the group vice president, and head of corporate strategy and development at Applied Materials. Applied Materials, as Alan was mentioning earlier, is the lead semiconductor equipment company in America. He is also, interestingly, and maybe we'll talk about this later, leading an initiative called the EPIC Lab. This will be in Silicon Valley. It's a $5 billion collaborative research and development laboratory for semiconductors. So hopefully you understand why I'm so excited. They're all representing slightly different parts of our private sector AI ecosystem. I will promise to ask them only questions for a few minutes, and then 20 minutes to be exact. And then turn it over to you. So please do start thinking about your questions, and we'll pass the mic. But I want to start with a sort of, actually, I think, Alan, you said, what are we trying to achieve here? And with each of you giving us your perspective on what is the positive AI future that you see? Why should we be so excited? Why should we be fighting for this lead? And as opposed to some of my frustrations, you can get these very vague conversations about, oh, AI is going to be fantastic. Please be specific. So can you give us a clear example of why we should be excited and what we're fighting for here?
Absolutely. I'll start with it.
Yeah.
I'm a techno-optimist, right? Like, you can't be an entrepreneur and not be an optimist, right? It has to go hand in hand. So I look at a future where things get done faster, right? Like Emilia mentioned about us winning the Navy contract. In the Navy, we reduced the time to deployment by 97%. Think about that for a second, right? You got a capability that could take months and months to develop and deploy. We did that in weeks because of AI. Think about that application within your lives. Everything that we touch, if we shorten the time and we get the outcomes, the secretary talked about the outcomes, right? Like, everything that we do is outcome based. If that outcome is achieved in a faster manner, that is what AI can do, right? That is what I'm excited about, right? I have a good friend of mine, Alexis Bonnell, the former CIO of AFRL. She mentions this. Time is a weapons platform. Okay, our bureaucracy kills time, right? But that's a different story. Time is a weapons platform. And for us, time is the one component that we can never earn back. You can earn how much ever money you want, right? You can make millions, billions. You apply yourself, you'll make that money. You can lose it and you can make it again. You'll never get that time that you lost. AI is going to give us that time. That is my optimistic view.
I lit up when you mentioned Alexis. I used to work with Alexis at Google public sector. She's fantastic. And I completely agree, Jags, but I have to say, I think not to take it in a non-positive direction, I wish what you were saying wasn't novel and interesting. As Secretary Estevez very quickly passed by, his organization not only was understaffed, but it was using really bad old technology. And I think the positive future, if I spin this in a positive direction, is that a lot of government systems still aren't in the cloud. So we have no ability to use any of the things you were just talking about. And we have really wonderful pilot projects. Navy, Air Force is also driving a lot of really cool things. So there's a huge opportunity. I could not agree more.
So when I think about this, let me give an example from one particular part of AI that's really exciting, which is the way AI is transforming the way we write software. And a couple different dimensions to this that are really interesting, right? One is the unlock that AI provides to actually kind of flip around some essentially traps we've been stuck in, kind of local minima we've been stuck in for a long time around, for example, modernization of our technology. In most organizations across the US government that seek to transform, so much of their budget is locked down just in kind of trying to maintain legacy infrastructure. They can't actually invest to modernize. So when we can use tools like AI, transform the way we code, suddenly write mass amounts of infrastructure as code with AI, we can reverse kind of this math, this calculus that's kept, many necessary modernizations and transformations from even being possible. So that's an example of kind of one side of this is that the other thing I think is really exciting about Code AI and really a much broader vision of an AI-driven future is the potential to unlock the workforce, right? People who wouldn't traditionally participate in various kinds of workforce roles can actually do that if we use AI properly. An example, I got a call actually this week from someone who retired 10 years ago as a senior scientist at Leidos, who is now getting back into writing software, and he wanted to know about coding assistants. We had this long discussion about his favorite coding assistants, my favorite coding assistants, and what he's seeing. And one thing, I think that's just an example of how AI is now actually creating opportunities for people who haven't traditionally been in various labor roles to actually take on and participate in the development of technology, in doing different kinds of work than they actually would be able to do without AI's help. So I'm really excited about that part of our future.
Great. Well, I think we're all in agreement that this is just an incredibly exciting time to be working in technology. AI has got infinite potential applications, and right now we're in the very early phases of deployment. So I agree with all of the points that we made, and maybe I'll just introduce a couple of additional ideas. So the first idea is that AI over the next couple of decades is actually going to be an economic necessity. In developed economies, there are huge changes taking place in demographics, which are resulting in the working population shrinking and the non-working population growing. So if you call the working population people between 18 and 64 years old, the non-working population, kids and people older than 65. Back in 1997, that ratio was 6.8 to 1. If you look at that ratio today, it's 3.9. And if you project out to 2050, it's going to be 2. And the solution to that, the only solution is to drive productivity in the economy. And the only way that you can drive productivity at that magnitude is with technology, AI and automation. The other idea that I'll put out there as a research and development centric company is that we're learning that AI can solve problems that humans can't on their own. So it's got enormous applicability in research and development. One example that I'll throw out there is quantum computing, and I think Alan mentioned this in his talk. So quantum computing has already been under development for a couple of decades. We're probably a decade away from it being a mainstream technology. And there are just incredible technology challenges to get that ready for large-scale deployment. Today, the leading quantum computing companies are using AI and R&D to accelerate their development. So quantum may end up being one of these first game-changing technologies where it's a co-development between humans and AI, and humans don't end up actually not fully understanding how all of the technology works.
So those are the bright visions. And I know Addie was interested in also talking about some of the challenges, and we will get there, but I promise. But I just want to play back what I think I heard, because there's an element of human flourishing, frankly, that I think you're arguing AI will help to unlock. There is productivity, whether it be in terms of times or capabilities like coding. And then there's strategic advantage, just the ability to sort of economically, but then obviously I think in defense terms. And then the doing what we couldn't do before. So there are different elements to how AI could potentially be, or why we're so motivated to sort of stay ahead in this competition. The other piece then is, well, how do we stay ahead? And one of the lots of conversations about what's holding us back, but let's start with what are we good at? Where are our strengths that we should be emphasizing or at least protecting before we get into the things that hold us back? So I'm happy to start with it. We don't have to continue to go sequentially. But if someone can jump in and say, what is the thing that the strength that you want to point out that is really needs to be protected and that is enabling our competition?
I'll go with I'll just throw something provocative out. Kind of piggybacking on Ron a little bit. One of the challenges with using arcane software is this new generation that is completely fluent in every tool, ChatGPT, TikTok, whatever it is, wants to be using all of that new technology to bring to bear on any industry that America is already good at, right? And to keep us ahead, we need to capitalize on the talent of the incoming generations, not weigh them down with old technology. So I think that's an opportunity. We need to be thinking about that in the future of not only government services, because they're going to face the same thing. If you're trying to attract the best and the brightest to come work at DoD, they want to be doing interesting work with interesting tools. So we really need to be laying down a path to enable that amazing talent that we still have here in America that, frankly, we are the generator of these new tools. That's why we're still in the ahead.
I think it's interesting because when you first started answering that question, I was thinking, well, okay, I think this is a DoD-centric answer because if I'm frustrated with the tools in the DoD, but maybe not if I'm working in Google. In Google, I can work with the cool tools. Okay, because I feel like there's the other element of the enabling talent is so much comes out of the private sector, and so that while we're talking about enabling the public sector with these tools, how are we also keeping it for the
leveraging private sector tools? Exactly. I mean, the age of government building its own tools is dead, and we saw that actually in the most recent AI memo from this administration, and certainly in the overhaul of procurement and FedRAMP. We're seeing it. They're prioritizing commercial applications in order to keep up. And that is the right direction to make sure that we're still feeding that workforce that is at the cutting edge of innovation.
Yeah. Anything else on talent, or go ahead?
Yeah, I'll maybe offer a thought. I think, in terms of US competitiveness, it's really important to look at the entire technology stack that's going to enable AI. So at the top of that stack, you've got the applications and the models and the software. The US is very, very strong in those areas. The middle of the stack is really right now all about the data center and how the design of those data centers is going to evolve. And then at the base of the stack, there is the semiconductors, the chips, the brains, the compute, the storage that's going to go into the data centers. So I think the interesting thing today is if you look at that complete stack, there's not a single country or company that has leadership across the entire stack. Today, we're dependent on other countries, a variety of companies to feed into that stack. The other thing that I would say is that technology is going to change very considerably, and we can talk a little bit about some of the drivers of why it needs to change. But the technology is going to change considerably over the next 5, 10, 15 years. And the data centers that we're building today, the 2025 data centers, that's going to be the equivalent of those cell phones that were the size of a brick. So really, this is all about this race on how to bring next generation technology to market. And the decision for the US is, where do you want to protect and maintain technology leadership versus where you're going to partner with other countries that have strength in certain other areas of that technology stack.
So it sounds like your argument there slightly is partly just partnership, is knowing how to smartly navigate those partnerships.
100%. Yeah.
I will just note, we obviously, we talked about already the importance of the American commercial ecosystem and, the incredible innovation that's going on through that commercial ecosystem. But obviously, one of the most important national assets we have also, is our higher education, right? Is these incredible institutions of higher learning that we have that serve two critical functions. First, advancing the research. It's become more challenging now as huge scale compute is necessary, but still, U.S. universities make tremendous contributions to laying the foundational components that enable what we do at every layer of that stack. And then the other part of it is sources of talent, right? We have a educational ecosystem that is producing consistently the highest end talent in the world. It's the envy of the world. We have, China now races to try and produce similar quality educational outcomes from their universities. But, to the extent that we continue to empower our academic institutions to be the critical resource that they are to our national security, I think that is a crucial component to our strategy moving forward.
I love that point. And my colleague Cole McFall, who I think is probably here somewhere, also wrote a fantastic op-ed that just talked about the Chinese Academy of Science and sort of how influential the Chinese Academy of Science is, but how much they've taken really and copied from our successes, frankly. And I think it also bridges, if I can just pull on you, Tristan, because we were just talking before the panel about your efforts with EPIC to try and bring together academia with industry to harness and to keep sort of these academic institutions contributing. Would you mind just briefly talking a little bit about that vision?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to you're in an environment where a lot of the technology that's going to allow AI to be deployed at large scale hasn't been invented yet. So you're in a foot race between companies and countries. So one of the ways that you can increase speed of development and commercialization of technology is to collaborate better across the stack. And I think the universities are a huge asset for the US. Our observation on the hardware side of the universities is they're churning out these great ideas in technology, but more often than not, some of those technologies fail because of economics. They're never going to make it into a commercial product because you're never going to get it into a cost envelope that would make sense for large markets. Industry can provide that feedback, that signal back into universities earlier. They can modify their research portfolio, look at how they're making those investments. I think the other opportunity is to get the signals from the companies that are working all the way at the top of the technology stack, developing the end applications, back to the companies that are developing foundational technology. What's required on this side versus what's the art of the possible. And that's really the big idea behind our EPIC Center investment. How can you bring those partners together in a single location to get that communication flowing faster and more effectively?
So now, as promised, we should talk about the hurdles, which could take, I know we can't take the rest of the panel. Oh yeah, please.
So I want to bring in a counterfactual argument here, right? We protect ourselves. If Cold War had extended into the 2000s, would we have adopted open source technologies, open source in software development? Think about that for a second, right? When the wall came down and the Cold War ended, that's when internet became more available, right? And that's when internet grew. With internet growing, open source grew. And some of the challenges today we face with models being copied or technology being pilfered, for lack of better terms, is because of open source, right? If we had Cold War continuing into the 2000s, would we have had a fractured internet? Would we have had protectionism even in our software? Should we consider that type of mode today, that type of mode today of operations? Certain things can be open source, certain things needs to be closed source, right? So just want to leave that as a thought for you guys to think about.
Sounds like a great research project for my colleagues at CSET and not necessarily me. But so let's turn to the challenges, right? So we've talked about some of the great things, but there are real challenges. I think Alan got a few. To your mind, what are the challenges that really need to be addressed that aren't already being addressed, I suppose?
So when I started latent AI in 2018, 2019 timeframe, the first two investment calls that I had was with Chinese investors out of Hong Kong, right? And the first two companies that approached me were China Mobile and Lenovo, right? And I have been approached by Chinese investors, and actually the brother-in-law of Secretary of Transportation for the CCP, he approached me to start my then company in Shanghai, right? So I'm a China hawk from being Indian. You can realize that. So I was always wary of that, and I cut that conversation short right then and there. Not many folks in Silicon Valley have that background or that I don't know, the patriotism that certain people carry, right? So they take money, and there are conversations that I've had that IP gets stolen at the investment stage. Forget about growth. It gets stolen at investment stage because they can throw resources at an idea, and they can expand that very fast, very quickly than what we can do. Because as an entrepreneur, I know how much of a struggle it is to go raise money. Right here, we need to have proof points and stuff. There, the government is going to write checks and like, all right, you people are going to work on this, go figure this out, and you're going to work on the counter side of it, go work on it. So how do we have CFIUS and stuff. CFIUS is great for post analysis, but not in protecting how the money is coming in and how the technology is being taken out of us, right? Last point here is that when Silicon Valley Bank collapsed that weekend, and I was one of the affected, right? Like I had millions of dollars in my bank account and I don't have access to the bank account. I don't know how to run payroll in 7 days from now, okay? I fielded a call. Even though they knew me as a China hawk, I fielded a call. They called me up and say like, hey, we will fund you. Not just me, 7 friends in the defense tech side had similar calls. They were going to buy pennies on the dollar. They were willing to give money, right? So that is happening even today. It's happening under the covers. How do we prevent that? How do we, and financially, like, you know, Treasury should be stepping in and preventing this kind of money movement. That is a critical aspect that we need to be looking at. I'm passionate about this.
That's a really powerful story. I knew we could take the rest of the time talking about challenges, but what other challenges do we want?
I'll talk briefly about an interesting dimension of the challenge, which is around kind of cybersecurity and protecting our AI knowledge. I mean, one of the things, there are a couple of different angles about the DeepSeek, kind of the series of events leading up to the release of the DeepSeek models, and then what's happened since that really highlight vulnerabilities and challenges in our AI ecosystem. I mean, I think it's now widely understood that the DeepSeek team certainly had access to some materials within CUDA that reflected kind of probably access to proprietary information. I think most people believe they were making wide use of and distilling results from American commercial models in ways that they not supposed to be doing. So we know that there was a sort of level of IP theft going on behind the DeepSeek model. As DeepSeek's been released, now instantly the moment it was out on GitHub, literally within days there were model versions being released that had known compromises and vulnerabilities injected into them. And so organizations that blocked their developers from downloading DeepSeek were just encouraging them to download these alternative versions that actually had these known vulnerabilities. So there's a whole level of AI security, both the security around the AI ecosystem to prevent, for example, IP loss that's only going to get more intense as the size of investment and the value of these models continues to increase on the one side. And then the other side is the building out the security infrastructure around our AI models themselves, or how we build them, how we operate them, where components come from. We'll need the AI bill of materials, just like we have a software bill of materials. All these components are really immature. And the challenge is everyone's trying to move so fast in this space. We are in danger of ending up exactly what the same mistakes we did when we built out the internet, and everyone was doing it as quickly as they could with security as an afterthought, and something we really have to get right and bake in.
Please go.
I'll say something really unpopular in CSET, which is I worry sometimes that, and I work for Google Cloud, which again, as Emmy said, I think a lot about how our enterprise customers or our government customers are using these models. I don't work at DeepMind, where like all I think about is the frontier models. How do we create AGI? So it's two very distinct ways of thinking about AI. And I find myself always in the position of thinking, kind of what Secretary Estevez again alluded to. I keep coming back to your comment, Secretary, which is supply chains are a weapon.
And you don't need a frontier model to disrupt supply chains. And so I do fear sometimes that we are over-indexing on the latest chip, whatever chip it is that is enabling the thing, because there are other ways to be disruptive that don't require that level of tech, the newest chip, the newest, whatever it is. And certainly we've seen evidence of that in Gaza and Israel and in Ukraine. And so, I don't have a solution, but I do worry that we think too much about what's the frontier look like and not enough about like what old technology can you use to be disruptive. And I'm reading Dune right now, so I'm also thinking a lot about that too. It's taking me right there. So if you haven't read it lately, pick it up, or if you haven't read it, it's as relevant as ever.
Well, I actually don't think what you're positing is unpopular at CSET at all, because I would take it even one step further, that even the AI that we have, let's figure out what to do with it and how to use it and how do you wrap it into DoD operations. So I think there's a whole gamut here that is way beyond just what does the frontier hold, but frankly, what can we do right now with what's pretty great tech? It's not perfect, but it's pretty great. Anyways, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I don't want to pile on all of the challenges and make this kind of depressing, but there's one other huge challenge on the hardware side that we should definitely mention, and that's energy consumption. Mm-hmm. So I'll just use ChatGPT as an example. If you look at the data center that's used to train the ChatGPT models today, current generation, that's a 10 megawatt class data center. So that's consuming as much energy as 5,000 homes. The next version of the ChatGPT model will use 100 times more compute and 10 times more energy. So now you're at a 100 megawatt class data center, 50,000 homes. By 2027, you'll 10x the compute again, or 100x the compute, 10x the energy again. Now you've got a gigawatt class data center. So that's the same as a nuclear reactor. In fact, for those of us on the West Coast, the Hoover Dam, the generation capacity is 2.1 gigawatts. And there we're talking about one application for AI and one company. So that energy is driving a lot of the cost, which is really preventing deployment at scale. But there's also going to be an energy availability issue because you can't bring some of that supply on fast enough to serve those different applications. So I think from the hardware side, the grand challenge that we see in the semiconductor industry and TSMC have kind of put the number out there that we need a 10,000 times improvement in the energy efficiency of the hardware in the data center. So essentially the compute performance per energy consumed, or for the technical people, flops per watt. Over the next 15 years. Now, the interesting thing is if you look at history, that's what the semiconductor industry has delivered in the last 15 years. So it is possible. But when you look at that roadmap, it's very complex. There's lots of interdependencies. And, as I say, this is going to be a race of which companies and countries can actually go and execute that roadmap most effectively.
I have to just jump in real quick here. I don't have I wish I had brought a device up here to rattle up.
I don't remember
awesome
numbers, so
statistics. You are really good at that. But I have to say, one of the things that Google Cloud is doing, just to ring our own bell for a second, is I think people were really confused 5 years ago when we started investing in TPUs. But we just rolled out a couple weeks ago our latest generation of Ironwood TPUs, which are specialized to Google services because we are trying to drive efficiency. And if I remember correctly, Ironwood is 7 times more efficient than the TPU before it. And it's multiples more efficient than GPUs, which are not specialized across services. So just a plug to say that I think we are moving in the right direction in some areas, but recognize that again, TSMC, fabs, this is all interconnected, and to drive efficiency for any specific service requires years and years and years of work.
Maybe I can just add 30 seconds ago. I think this is a super exciting example, but you can also look at interdependencies across the stack. So this transition from using general purpose silicon, things like GPUs, custom solutions that are application specific, workload specific, is one of the ways that you can get these big improvements in energy efficiency. What we've seen is Google and a lot of your competitors build out chip design teams within the organization to go and execute those type of strategies. Big challenge is if you're going to design an AI chip from scratch, that's $1 billion investment to design that project. So the amount of companies that can actually do that are very small. So the industry has a solution that's being developed in parallel that's called heterogeneous integration or advanced packaging. And this is a way of splitting a very large chip into smaller pieces of silicon and then reconnecting those pieces of silicon using very, very kind of complex material science packaging technology. So the implications of when that technology is also in the very early stages of development, is available today. NVIDIA and AMD and Google already use it, but it has a long roadmap ahead of it. One of the implications of heterogeneous integration or advanced packaging is it brings down the barriers to entry for chip design. Because if you're a company, you can now just redesign the part of the chip that's going to give you differentiation or a competitive advantage, and you can buy generic chiplets that serve all of the other functions on the chip. So that's really exciting because potentially it can accelerate innovation because more companies will be able to design those much more efficient, custom application-specific chips.
And
I
one plug
love
here,
triplets too.
we are actually building compiler to support that heterogeneous environment. We can split the graph to run on general purpose and accelerators.
It's like we're solving problems in real time.
The most productive panel I've been on in a very long time. I'm over the time I promised to take. So if there are questions, if I don't see questions, I'll just keep going. Yeah, okay, there we go. And if you could, there's going to be a microphone that comes to you. If you could just stand and say your name, where you're from, and then be sure to pose a question. It's right here in the front, Alex.
Hi, I'm Sean Merrill. I work for Department of Defense. I'm curious how, from your perspective, given the need to adopt AI technology as quickly as possible, how we ought to balance the advantages that AI can provide us with the risk of reducing human involvement in decision-making and other outcomes.
I can start with that. Right? I'll give you two concrete examples that we are actually working on. So we're working with the team in Detroit around ground vehicle survivability. You've got sensors around the convoy that's going around, and you have projectiles coming at it. You have objects coming at it. You don't know what they are, whether it's a bird, a drone, or you have sensor that is able to detect and classify what object that is. And you don't want that information going to the captain inside the vehicle saying like, hey, this is it. Do you want to, produce a lethal or non-lethal response to it? That time you're dead, right? Right there is where you give autonomous response to the system, and then it is doing protective work. And another time you're flying over and you've got a target you locked in, and there are collateral damage potential possible there. That is when you give that command to the commander saying like, okay, hey, this is the recommendation. This is the probabilities of stuff. You decide whether to execute or not. Pull the firearm. So those are, each application depends on how you're going to apply. And that's where the human decision needs to come in, right? Like at the enterprise level, you decide that. And then at the operational level, it needs to be autonomous.
If I know I'm not on the panel, but just to jump in very quickly. As a former Aegis weapon system person, I think defensively we have these weapons. And we have very mature ways of controlling them. I think offensively is where the questions get a little harder or a little more recent. And in that, if I can plug, we did a very exciting report, and my colleague and co-author Christine Fox is here on the 18th Airborne's operationalization of Maven Smart System. And what I think is important from that report really is that there are a lot of risks in our current targeting processes. There are mistakes, and Igor Mikulich is here. He can tell you about all of the ones that he's seen. These systems can reduce those mistakes. So, I think in some regards it's actually providing more control, but it is absolutely a concern that we all have to work through. Sorry, I didn't have to jump in there. Do we have, I think there's a question.
Good. Hi, it's Sebastian Forgas. I'm a technology lawyer. I wanted to ask another question related to Tristan about the energy issue about water. And I think that's like a companion component. And in cooling all these data centers, and the responsibility of people that are developing systems in the stack to make investments responsibly. I'm going to pick on TSMC. It's one of my favorite companies, but I'll still pick on them. They chose Arizona. It's one of the driest states in the country. So like, obviously that's not a data center, but it's a part of the stack. And so like, at what level do these companies have a responsibility to investments in resources that are responsible to enable the future that we're talking about here?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. So, the fabs themselves are consuming the same amount of power and water as a city of 50,000 people. So where you put those fabs in the world is going to be very important. I think with CHIPS Act, some of those decisions were optimized around incentives. Clearly, it's a lot more expensive to build and operate those facilities on certain other locations in Asia. So they kind of optimized around the operating costs rather than some of the environment impact. What I would say is there's a lot of work going on in the industry, both to try and optimize the manufacturing cycle and use materials, water, power more efficiently. But the real impact that the industry can have is in those end applications. So the impact in the data center of having a more energy efficient chip is actually about 10,000 times more impactful than operating the manufacturing footprint itself. So I'm not sure whether that answers your question or even kind of helps, but just a few thoughts on why the fab was based there.
We have one here, and then we'll go there. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Neil Simmons. I'm a visiting fellow for New America. Questions around energy for compute. A lot of my work is in Africa. That's 50% of my work. And last week was the IMF World Bank spring meetings. My own employer, World Bank, they're trying to figure out how do you support countries who want to own their own tech sovereignty. A lot of these countries don't, they can't afford Western hyperscalers, but they want their own data centers. But I've advised in the World Bank, there should be like a shared model. I'm calling it shared digital infrastructure, SDI. What's your thoughts of having compute capability connected to renewable resources, i.e. geothermal or electric hydro dams? Ethiopia built this Ramsar's dam about 5 years ago. And I think these hyperscalers should be connected to those type of great capability to support regional efforts. And so each country owning its own data center. That's my question. Thank you.
It's not your question, but I guess I'm pushing back on the premise a little bit that that's a good idea. Sovereignty at the end of the day is a risk management decision. And I love risk management. It's like I've been working on it for 4 years at Google in different directions. And the fact that now sovereignty is occurring to me as a total risk management decision, what you're talking about, when we talk with most governments, Africa, Asia, Europe, where literally is ground zero of the sovereignty conversation, it's for them a question of they want their own data center to control the whole stack because they will tell you their fear is that an American company could unplug the data center and, that's the risk. Now, the question they have to ask themselves is the reason they would rely on an American provider to provide that layer of infrastructure is because we can provide redundancy, security, resiliency, all of the things that you really do need to operate a government, to operate key industries. And so you have to ask yourself, what's the risks in trying to build your own data center with probably older technology? Because let's be honest, it takes a lot of years and a lot of money to do it. So by the time you get a data center up and going, what's the risk of losing out on using American technology? Now, I do understand that for certain supercritical workloads, and certainly we have the same concerns here in the United States with military applications, you do want your data localized, and that can be met at a different level without a whole data center. And so I do think we need to rethink how we approach the sovereignty conversation. I would also point out that one of the things we haven't talked about, which I feel is very interesting, is submarine cables, which is actually, I would put in the positive. America leads by a great factor over any other country, largely because of the commercial investment in them. It's not government driven. And actually, we have a lot of submarine cables that do deliver data in and out of Africa. There's been huge investments in submarine cables to Africa. And again, I think we have to think about the whole layer of the stack and what are the actual needs and weigh risks as they go. Energy is one risk for sure that needs to be considered. But yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
Oh, that was interesting. Did you have a...
No, I think the only other comment that I would make is, if you think about a multi-decade build out of AI, the technology is going to get better and better. The technology is going to get more efficient. And as that happens, the cost is going to come down. You're going to open up more applications, more of the market. So actually, even if you can make the data center hardware 10,000 times more energy efficient, overall demand for electricity may go up because the market grows so rapidly. So I think availability of energy, clean energy, is going to remain a key kind of factor in the build out of AI as that progresses over the next, 10, 20 years.
We have time for one more question. You have the mic, so you should.
Sorry, I'll try to keep this brief. Thank you, Daniela Moy from Georgetown. So whenever the word win is in the mix of a title for an event, like people think race and competition, we're also talking about commercialization. And there was a lot of talk around like competing. It's in the context of the US competing with China. There's a lot of domestic competition. It's not just power and water and land. It's also workforce for the data centers. Like when people think of AI, they don't think of electricians, but they're needed to power the data centers and make them work. And when it's about collaboration, it's not just domestic collaboration. It's also international collaboration with allies, which seemed more plausible in the past, kind of questionable with not just export restrictions, but import substitution with the new tariffs. So if we want the economics to work at scale for the commercialization to happen at the frontier, what's the right balance between competition and collaboration? And are we headed in the right direction?
Can start. I think the competition is, I think we all understand that there's one near peer competitor for us, right? There has to be a certain level of collaboration, but not at a full scale. But the collaboration has to exist with the allies that are going to be supporting us, that share our values, common values that we have, right? So you cannot collaborate with an adversary that is trying to undermine you every step of the way, right? The playing field is not level with that adversary. Right? You cannot have a WTO status as a developing nation when you have a GDP growth, and right. So though the disparities exist, and we need to be always like considered the big brother, or like we need to give in for everything, right? We shouldn't be playing at that level anymore. So there is no cooperation there. There's that the competition comes in, right? With the other allies, yes, we should collaborate. So.
Let me add an interesting dimension to this. We tend to think about this purely in terms of competition with China and collaboration with allies. I actually think we may face a need to figure out how to collaborate on certain issues with China as well. One of the issues I think is really concerning around AI, and we need to really start thinking about, is as there is a potential that these AI models are going to reach levels of capability that are challenging for us to manage. And as we think about, I think this issue of how we actually make sure AI models stay aligned is not something that any one company, one nation can possibly kind of unilaterally do or impose on others. I think it will actually take a collaborative approach shared across all of humanity to make sure if models do emerge that are troublingly powerful, that we understand and share common goals on how we keep them aligned toward at least a base set of principles we all can agree to.
in less than the 2 to 3 year governance cycle that I talked about earlier. Well, thank you all so much. This was a great and very productive discussion. So thank you. What we're going to do now is just take a 10-minute break. We'll restart at the half hour. And then my colleagues from CSET will come up and discuss some of the themes we talked about here and maybe expand on them a bit. So please join me in thanking our panelists.
All right, we just had a wonderful discussion exploring the vision we have for the AI ecosystem in the US, talking about the factors that make that future probable and how we can reinforce them and some of the challenges we want to overcome. What we want to do in this panel is not only continue this line of discussion, but complement it a bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to speak with some CSET researchers. We're going to ask them a fairly similar question about where they see AI going in the future. And then we're going to dig into some of the observations and comments that came from the prior panel. We're going to talk a little bit about the research we have, what insights we may have on some of these challenges. And in going back and forth, thinking about the two panels, one thing that I selfishly want to get out of this are actually some interesting ideas for where we will shape our forthcoming research programs as we see where are areas that need more research, we don't have answers that clearly matter as we shape the AI ecosystem for the future. So that's our goal for today. And what I want to do is introduce our four panelists. And first thing I'm going to do is sit down now that you're all gathered here. To my immediate right is Ali Crawford. She is a research analyst on our cyber AI project here and also part of our workforce team. She focuses on building and maintaining the cyber and artificial intelligence education and workforce ecosystems of the United States. Work has been cited in the President's National AI Research and Development Strategic Plan and in OMB's memo on advancing responsible acquisition of artificial intelligence in government. To her right is Steph Batalis. He is a research fellow at CSET who leads our biotech project. Her research in this area examines a number of issues at the intersection of AI and biosciences, and looks at how emerging technologies can impact both biomedical research and biosecurity. Before coming to CSET, Steph was the STEM Policy Fellow at North Carolina Biotechnology Center. To her right is John Bansimer. He is the director of our Cyber AI project. He came to us from a career in the Air Force, having retired as a lieutenant general and being involved in a variety of positions in cyber, space, and intelligence. Most recently, before coming to CSET, he was working at ODNI as the Assistant Director for National Intelligence for Partner Engagements. And finally, to the far right is Helen Toner, our Director of Strategy and of Foundational Research Grants Program at CSET. She previously worked as a senior research analyst at Open Philanthropy and studied in Beijing as an affiliate of Oxford University's Center for the Governance of AI. She's written for Foreign Affairs on AI and machine learning and how it bears to the US and China. And she's testified in front of the US-China Economic and Security Review Commission. I'm Igor Mikulich. You'll be your moderator for today. I'm the Director of Analysis at CSET. I came to CSET before having been at RAND. Before that, I was with Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation in the Office of the Secretary of Defense at the Pentagon. And before that, for many years at the Center for Naval Analysis and Military Ops Analyst. I get the pleasure of shaping overall research, which means I have the dirty on all these folks and know what questions to ask them. So anyways, I am going to start with a very broad question similar to the one for the last panel. I'd like to ask each of you first, where do you think we are today in the AI ecosystem? And what do you see that ecosystem looking like from your perspectives in, say, 2 to 5 years? I'll start with you, Ali, since you're on my right.
Sure, thank you. And maybe I shouldn't have chosen to sit in this seat since I would start first. But first, let me say what a pleasure it is to be in this room with all of you today and to be on this with my colleagues as well. and also was so excited and motivated to hear in the first panel all the discussions we had on talent development, workforce development. That is, of course, my line of work here, and so happy and excited to talk more about it. So let me start with this. 2023, CSET actually published a report where we surveyed more than 400 AI researchers to examine their compute use and how they think about compute's role in AI progress. And I think one of the most interesting findings from that report was actually that respondents reported that talent is actually the most important factor for project success. And in fact, if given more funding, they would use that to hire and attract and retain more talent. And so that means that all the things that we've talked about in the first panel, that we will talk about today, and that we will continue to talk about, none of it is possible if we don't have the talent to do it. And so talent means investing in good workforce development. And you can't have good workforce development without also talking about the education system that's built to support it. And so given that, right now, I think we're on the cusp of a potential fundamental workforce transformation. And I don't say this lightly or often very enthusiastically either, because there are some concerns that come with it. And so AI is quickly evolving, ever changing. And so it's difficult, I think, to predict the ultimate impact that it will have on the workforce. But we do know that it does have the potential to disrupt the way we do work. In the most extreme case, it has the potential to completely displace workers or segments of the workforce. But, it also has the potential to shift the demand that we see in labor market as well. So, for example, if we see increased integration of AI systems across enterprises, we may see new demand or a rise for certain types of roles, like something my colleagues and I are seeing now is the rise of job postings for IT auditors and those that have CPAs that audit IT systems. And so, yeah, the effects do remain to be seen, but we do know that a potential shift, some sort of shift is coming. And so how do we prepare the workforce to meet those demands? And so a lot of my work right now is focusing on how do we build a resilient workforce? And I'm excited to talk more about that. But that's where I think we are today, is in the process of building the necessary workforce infrastructure to prepare that resiliency. But also, there's a lot of gray area because we don't know how AI will ultimately impact or change our workforce, and also our education system as well.
Please.
Yeah, thanks. So when I think about where AI is going for the biotech world, I think we're really just looking at where biotech wants to go already. Because when we think about what a life science researcher is actually doing in the lab, if you take away the pipettes and all of the chemicals and the big pieces of equipment, what they're really trying to do is they're trying to find patterns and important variables in these huge data sets, and often very noisy and messy data sets. And when you put it that way, it's something that AI seems very well suited for, especially when it comes to finding those really important little bits of information when you have a lot of information that might or might not all be relevant. So when we think about how AI can plug in, it's really just trying to achieve a lot of these same goals and research challenges that we're already trying to achieve in this space. And so what we want to be aware of as we move towards that is what the potential trade-offs or consequences could be of integrating AI into some of these work streams. So whether it's being aware of things like the potential for intentional misuse, or wanting to be aware of data privacy, or even the potential to exacerbate some of the biases that already exist in our healthcare system. These are all things that we want to keep in mind as we think about what the next 2, 5, 10 years look like for deploying these systems within biotech and within the life sciences. And so when we think about where we are now, for many of the systems that we're looking at, I think that we're really at this sort of activation point, or we need some activation energy, if you will, because a lot of the systems that we're looking at are almost mature enough to take off and achieve the potential that we're trying to achieve. but they're not quite there yet. They're not quite ready to be self-sustaining or not quite ready to be implemented. And so we're at this point where there's so much potential within reach, but it's going to take some infrastructure, some resources, potentially some investment, and even some direction to make sure that it's moving in the direction that we want it to go. So I would say where we are now is, looking kind of like Ali said, at something that could have a lot of potential. As we move towards that potential, we want to make sure that we're thinking about safety and security, but also thinking about how to make it happen, because the goals that we have for biotech are goals that make people healthier and safer.
John, please.
So first, thanks for that really narrow question of the AI ecosystem. That was great. So I will take my cue from Ali and Steph, and I'm just going to focus on kind of the cyber aspect of this. To set the stage, where are we right now with AI and cyber? Has AI fundamentally changed cyber at this moment? I would say it has not. That's a good news and a bad news piece. The good news is that a pretty amazing capability has not necessarily been brought into this domain really significantly. But the bad news is that the kind of current capabilities are still really effective. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why we haven't seen as much